A good novel tells us the truth about its hero, but a bad novel tells us the truth about its author. G.K. Chesterton. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Chimansky. The publishing industry is either an unmitigated catastrophe or in the best place it's ever been, depending on who you ask. And your take on the industry is going to be very different depending on if you're an independent author, an established author with an agent and supporting publisher, the executive of a small publishing company, or just your average reader. Today, we have the perfect person to make sense of it all. Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Mark is a writer, an editor, a professional speaker, and a self-proclaimed book nerd. Mark, welcome to the show. Thanks for making time.
Thanks for having me on the show. I love that quote from Chesterton. It's absolutely perfect. Love that you shared that.
Yeah, when you read a bad book, all it does is exposes the author for what they are.
100%.
Whereas good author is almost like invisible.
Yeah, in some ways, right? In some ways, they really can be.
I just want to hammer home how qualified you are for this conversation about the publishing industry. And like, you've published your first book back in 1992, and you have over 25 books published ever since. You also write books under the name Mark Leslie Lefebvre, which are essentially guides for aspiring authors for navigating the industry. You worked at Kobo as a director of author relations and publishing. The first question I have for you is, what haven't you done?
Skydived. I'm scared of heights, so I haven't done that yet. So, but in publishing, it's so funny. I mean, I started writing 40 years ago. I got my first rejection at the age of 15. And and actually in 92 was my very first story was published. My first book didn't actually come out until 2004, just to be clear on that. But I have worked in the book industry since 1992 as a bookseller, writer, and publisher. And I'm one of those strange people who can see the pros and cons of the traditional old school publishing world, as well as the pros and cons of the new digital indie / world. And what frustrates me more than anything is when you can't, because people in one camp can't see the other. It's not unlike the divisiveness we have in society today, where it's like, no, I can't even see your point of view because you're so different than me. Well, no, we're not all that different. And self-publishing and traditional publishing are not all that different when you actually peel away the onion.
Okay, so if I opened up the episode saying that there's this huge division where, depending on who you ask, it's either an absolute tragedy, a calamity just waiting to happen, or it's the best it's ever been. Like, is there really that level of divide?
It's both. It truly is both. We've had as a writer, from a writer perspective, we've never had more opportunity than ever before, more options, more choices. That also leads to more confusion and more challenges, and even worse, more predators in the industry than ever before too. So that means it's more dangerous, but also with more opportunity. So it's like this, it's always a double-edged sword, regardless. So the people who are saying it's bad is probably they're only looking at this part of the industry, not at this other thing.
Well, I mean, there's so many aspects to explore, AI and self-publishing and print on demand and author rights and the consolidation of the industry. But all that stuff, it's a lot to tackle. I was thinking we approach this conversation this way. It's a bit of a hypothetical to explore what it's like nowadays. Like, say that I wrote a book. Say I wrote an awesome manuscript. It's like Harry Potter in space mixed with like Colleen Hoover like romance, and everybody who reads it says it's awesome. Like, it's a bit rough around the edges, but like the potential is there. Everybody can see it. What are my chances looking like to make this thing successful? Like, what needs to happen in 2025 for that awesome manuscript to become successful?
Well, it depends on the path you want to take. And that's the thing, is you can take many paths. Now, if this were in the late 80s, early 90s, when you had this manuscript, you had the 12 big publishers. Now there's the 5 big because of amalgamation. So that means less choice, less opportunity, more curation, more gatekeeping than ever before for traditional publishing, right? There's not as many publishers buying. There's not as much competition to spark that excitement. But you have way more choice when it comes to how you want to do it yourself. And doing it yourself means, do I hire some company, like some vanity publishing company that actually does all the work for me? Do I hire the editor and the cover designers myself and publish it myself? Do I publish direct to the various platforms? Do I publish direct to some platforms and go through a distributor or an aggregator? Do you know what I mean? So it kind of, the challenge is, yes, it's easier to get the published than ever before, but it's also harder because there's so many moving parts. Whereas before, you wrote a manuscript and sent it off to an agent in the hopes that they would bless it and suddenly it would get published. But that's just the first step. We haven't talked about how to make it successful. And that's where it gets even more complicated, right?
So it's kind of confusing because there are your traditional publishing companies, which you said there used to be 12 big ones and now we're down to 5, but you can self-publish. So it's a question of, do you want to publish with the backing of a big company or do you want to publish yourself? But just because you publish it doesn't mean it's successful. Like, so far from that. Is it?
No, it's true.
Yeah. How hard is it to self-publish?
It's actually, it's easy to self-publish because you could technically take the manuscript, scribble with crayon to create a cover or whatever, Microsoft Paint, and publish that book in about 15 to 20 minutes with the free tools available. You don't want to do that because chances are it's not ready for prime time. It needs to be edited. It needs to be cleaned up. It needs to be revised to make it as good as book as possible. Just like going back to the Chesterton quote, right? You don't want it to be one of those writers. You want it to be a good book. And you also want it to be branded for the marketplace, which usually means working with a designer and not just a great artist, but somebody who understands that a book cover is marketing to a specific audience, like a type of reader, like what kind of well, that manuscript's going to be an interesting one because it's got elements of fantasy and science fiction and stuff that you were talking about. So we'd have to look at what's it similar to, what books are on the market, and where are we going to position this in the industry. Now, historically, publishers have always done all that. Now, with an independent author DIY mindset, you have to kind of do that learning yourself, or at least work with people who understand that. And that's the challenge. But I do want to say one thing, make it very, very clear. The number of titles that actually succeed in the marketplace is very similar to that 80-20 principle that I'm sure you're familiar with, is that 20% of the books published make 80% of the margin of the revenue of the industry. And the interesting thing is that it's the same whether it's traditionally published or self-published. It's a small group of titles. It hasn't changed. It's just changed that the slush pile, which is what the publishing industry referred to as the unsolicited manuscripts that are piled up, thousands and thousands of manuscripts, and the editor says, "Oh, I want this one." They call that the slush pile. It's kind of moved from the back room of HarperCollins and Penguin Random House, and it's moved to an online catalog near you. And it's the consumer, not the editor in New York, who bestows their blessing, not by saying, "Yes, thou shall be published," but "Yes, thou shall have a 5-star review, and I'm going to tell 20 of my friends because this is the best book I've ever read." So the curation's happening at a different layer or a different time place in the market, if that makes sense.
Right. It sounds like the marketing is done very differently than it used to be, where like word of mouth and mentions on social media is absolutely crucial for a book becoming popular. I look at like Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which has been at the top of the New York Times bestsellers list for like 3 digits weeks now. It's ridiculous. It's all because of TikTok.
Yeah, and so word of mouth used to be non-digital, right? Word of mouth is now a combination of in-person and digital. And the one thing I think, I know indie authors are making 5, 6, and 7 figures a year, whereas the average author income who's only traditionally published is going to be lucky if they hit $20,000 a year. It's because it's not a lot of money, right? It's not a profitable business for most writers. It's still not a profitable business for most indie writers, but one of the things is indie writers have really taken a hold and embraced digital and ebook publishing, and they have no clue just how gigantic the print industry still is, that 80% of readers are still reading in print books.
80%?
Right? Because they're still like, there are people who make 7 figures a year or 6 figures a year from selling ebooks. They're like, well, they think, oh, print books are nothing. And publishers who make the majority of their money from print books say, oh, ebooks are nothing. And that's one of the things I find so fascinating is they're both correct because they're both they're like the 2 different blind men looking at different parts of the element. One of them is holding the trunk and saying it's like a snake, and the other one's pressing against the side saying, no, an elephant's like a wall. it's that sort of misperception that they have.
It's your perspective is completely different on depending on where you're standing, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I know that Brandon Sanderson, he's a big fantasy writer.
Yeah.
His books are almost 50% bought as audiobooks.
Oh, I'm not
So the
surprised. Yeah.
format that people buy is very dependent on the genre. It seems like some genres get fit much nicer into certain
Yeah.
formats, right? Like print
Well,
books, I'm
yeah,
assuming
of
are more
course.
popular in print, right? So you can read by the dock at the cottage.
Well, I mean, and then there's the other thing too is in our busy world today, and audiobooks have seen triple digit growth in the last 5 years. I've long been an audiobook fan because A, I'm a slow reader. B, I used to drive and commute. And so I would listen to audiobooks and podcasts while I was driving. And
Mhm.
now it's like when you're busy, when you're walking the dog, shoveling, going for a run, all the other things, I can read while I'm doing something else that requires, that I can't safely run down go for a jog while holding a Brandon Sanderson 800 epic,
That would be
right?
impressive.
But I can put them on my phone. I can put that 32-hour audiobook on my phone and go, this is great. As I'm training for this marathon, I'm going to listen to Brandon's latest book.
Reading his books is like a marathon sometimes.
It really can be, actually, and so is writing apparently.
Yeah, he's ridiculously prolific. He has this whole system where he has like multiple layers of editors where he can just crank out like 2,000 words a day like it's nothing. But I want to get back to
Yeah,
this Harry Potter science fiction, Colleen Hoover romance
yeah,
hypothetical book that I'm working on. Um, Say I wanted to go the self-publishing route.
yeah.
What needs to happen for that book to be successful?
I think the very first thing you need to do is to find an editor that works with you, because an editor is like a good editor is like a relationship, like a marriage, right?
Mm.
Or a really solid friendship where you need somebody who can look at it, have a step back, and work at killing your darlings and helping you make that book the best possible book it can be. And there's so many different layers of editing. I'm just going to say editing in general. Some people who are not as experienced may need a developmental editor to help them pull out what they really wanted to do, but that they didn't do. Some might just need a copy edit or line edit or some suggestions or even feedback from sometimes just beta readers who say, hey, yeah, this character didn't come off the way I think you wanted them to. So it needs to have that second set of eyes. That's so critical. Because you often only get one chance to make that first impression to a reader. The other thing I think you desperately need is to have that cover image that appeals to who your target audience is, and understanding that target audience is critical. And
Mm.
then the third thing that you need is and this is before you've even begun, how am I going to publish it and where am I going to go, is the sales copy, which is the description, the blurb, which is not a blow by blow. There's a guy, see, and he's on a spaceship, see, and he has this thing and he does this and then he does that. No, it's often about a hook. It's that elevator pitch, that one log line that says, here's the fundamental thing that's going to pull you in, make you, I call it the lean forward moment, make you lean forward and go, ooh, tell me more. Right? That's the thing that you're going to want to do. And
Oh,
that's where you start. And it's not a lot of work apparently.
you mean the book description, like what you would typically
Yeah.
find in the back of the book?
Yeah, the back cover copy, or
Mm.
I like to think of it as the sales copy, because it really
Yes.
is.
Yeah.
It's a marketing tool. Your cover is a marketing tool. The blurb is a marketing tool, and even the book itself, the writing itself, is a marketing tool, because the marketing is, like you say, people don't walk into a bookstore and say, "Oh, I'm looking for a book by Tor or Bain Books." To speak of science fiction and fantasy, I'm looking for a Brandon Sanderson book, right? They buy books based usually on an author because they've read that author and they love that author's voice, and that's usually that's so
Mm.
part of the process. So your book itself is marketing for your other books too, when you think of it that way.
So maybe I don't know if you have any kind of ideas as in terms of like numbers, but everything you just described, like getting a good editor, having a good idea in the first place, a
Yeah.
good book cover, choosing the right services for self-publishing. Um, how hard is it to actually make that happen properly? Like, how often do people self-publish a book and it just sells 20 copies?
Most books that are published traditionally or self-published are going to sell less than 100 copies ever in
Less
their
than
lifetime.
100.
Yeah,
Most
in their
books. Well, what
lifetime.
is most books?
That's most books. That's probably
Most, like,
80% of the books that are being published are not going to sell that much. And
wow.
again, this came out in the court cases in New York several years ago when Simon and Schuster was going to be acquired by Penguin Random House. Now they said 1,000, but I thought they were being way generous. Only because having worked in the book industry, and of course I'm in Canada, so our market's a lot smaller. Maybe it's 1,000 in the States, maybe it's 100 in Canada, because it's a much smaller population here. But
Mhm.
that is the reality. Now that does not mean success or a lack of success, because for some authors, having a dream to write a book and publish a book and have 20 people buy the book, maybe that's success to them. Having one person read their book and say, wow, this changed my life, this was important, that can be a huge success. So it depends on how you measure success. And I was
Mm.
on a panel this weekend at the Toronto Indie Author Conference, and we talked about this, and I posed the question to the other writers is, would you rather have sell 1 million copies of this one book, or have 1 million readers? And I opted for 1 million readers, because I have way more than just one book. I don't want to just sell 1 million copies of one book, or have I want 1 million people to read that book, because there's a chance that I've done my job properly. And even if a small portion of those people go on to buy my books, I can sustain a living on that, right? That's the 1,000 true fans when you think of that old motif.
That's a great question to ask, though. It's a good would you rather, honestly. You can, if anybody would buy 1 million copies of if anybody could sell 1 million copies of their book, I mean,
Well,
that's
Brendan
a lot of
Sanderson
influence. Oh,
has millions.
hundreds of times over.
Yeah. But that's just last week.
Yeah, seriously. Hey, can I hit pause on the recording right now? My cat is going to town on the cat tree behind me. I forgot to close the door.
Yeah.
1 second.
Mine are in the other room. I'm lucky.
Guillaume, get out of there. Guillaume, get out. Okay. Yeah, he's out. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. All right. Mark, we can't talk about the modern publishing industry without talking about AI.
Right.
Let's start with the positives.
Yeah.
Have you seen it used positively in ways you don't think are detrimental?
Yeah, and that's a challenge. I think there are ways that authors can use it for quick research that doesn't normally takes them out of the manuscript to get something that's a realistic thing that they need to insert for a setting or something like that.
Mm.
There are ways that they can use AI. I use AI, Pro Writing Aid, for example, before I hand my manuscript to the editor to help. The AI helps me clean up my manuscript and remove things that would probably drive a human nuts because I repeat myself so much. And it gets rid of redundancies, saves me time. My editor's happy because the manuscript's cleaner when I get it to them. And I've even used AI voices for some of my audio stuff for my own podcast, as well as just for some other products. For example, I'll give you an example. Is I have I normally hire human narrators for my fiction, but for my nonfiction books, because people are used to hearing my voice, I wanted them to be in my voice, but I don't have the time to record them. I did one of my shorter ones where I did read by the author, The 7 Ps of Publishing Success, read by Mark Leslie Lefebvre. And that took me a long time to record, because as you know, it's not just you sit there and you knock it out of the park. Lots of editing and producing and stuff like so. 4 hours for every hour of final audio. And that's someone who knows what they're doing usually. But then I have an AI version that costs 99 cents. And one of the AIs is my voice, and another one is Brian, a British male, because he sounds smarter than me, anyways. And I think when people go to consume a book in that fashion, some people prefer to have the author's voice, and other people don't care; they just want the content. And I've even encountered for one of my books, Wide for the Win, I had a reader who was blind, and a large print book's not going to help them. And the audiobook would have taken me. It's a 400-page book. It would have taken me. I don't have a full 3 weeks to work on it, is
Oh,
what it would take me. So I asked if he'd be okay if he just had an AI audiobook, and 4 hours later, I had a book for him.
4 hours. Wow. A
Yeah.
400 page book.
I used Google
That's
Play.
incredible.
I used Google Play Partner Center as an independent author. My ebook was loaded there, and I just used the free tools they had. And I said, "Hey, if you're okay with AI, I can get you one, by tomorrow." And I made it. I did some basic cleanup on pronunciation and stuff, and said, "Here," because for me it was about accessibility, making the book actually more accessible because it was not available to him, and it hurts me when a book is not available to a reader who wants one.
We've talked about this a lot on this show. If AI narration for audiobooks, and that, like, obviously there's tons of books that it's just not realistic for the publisher and the author to pay the expensive fees to produce a
Yes.
human narrated audiobook. This is when AI narration is a real boon,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
because that reader, someone like myself who's blind, can finally access it in a way that's like, it's more than just a screen reader. It's like a high quality AI voice. There's a big difference, right? And
Right.
AI is like very robotic. These AI voices are getting pretty damn good.
Yeah, some of them are pretty decent. The other thing I did too is in another book, and it's not AI, but I think an AI version would be great. I just haven't had the time to do it.
Mm.
Is I had professional narrators do a duet narration of a romantic comedy,
Mm.
but my one narrator, she was on her honeymoon, so the book was
Oh
going to be
no.
delayed 3 months. So Julie and I, my co-author, we did a read by the author version, and we're not professional narrators, so that one was $5. And then the professionally narrated version was a full $18 because it cost us thousands of dollars. But I'd even like to do an AI narrated one with the two duet voices, male and female voices, and maybe make that 99 cents or $2 or whatever. So you
Mark,
can choose which one you want, right?
is that a trend? Is it a
Uh,
trend for
I
AI
want
narrated books to be cheaper?
I I think it's because I didn't have to spend as much time on it, or it didn't cost me thousands of dollars. So why, if I have, like, with the $18 for the audiobook, I need to sell hundreds of copies of that book in order to make my money back on my investment. When I did it myself, it didn't cost me as much; it just cost me some time. And when I used AI, it cost me even less time. So I'm of the thought process that if it took a while to create the art, it's going to cost more. But if it took me a little less time to create it, I don't want to put that cost on the consumer. I want it to kind of reflect that. And I like people having a choice. Could you imagine that you could choose to have this book read by different people? And one of the dreams I have, I would love to license my voice because I'm not a professional narrator, but some people like my voice. And if you want to hear this voice in this book in my voice, maybe I get a micropayment for the use of AI to narrate it in my voice. And then that way, voice talents who are busy and can't do all the projects, like the backlist of HarperCollins, they could potentially get some micropayments, because I've made good money as an author from micropayments through library checkouts. And I know it's actually a sustainable, it's at the scalable level, it actually becomes, a dollar here, a dollar there becomes $10, $50, $100, and that can actually grow over time with volume, right? In the long tail.
You're very forward thinking when it comes to AI. We've spoken to people on the show before, and we asked them before we start recording, like, "Are you comfortable talking about AI?" And they just go, "No, not
No,
touching
no,
that.
no.
Absolutely not.
Now
Like, I
for
don't want to talk about
writing,
that."
yeah, for writing, I'm a little bit more, and I respect that there are authors who will use it in the process of writing, and they think of AI as a co-author. I think there's probably, and I'm always scared because every new technology, there's scammers who just go, "Oh, I don't know how to write a book. I'm going to get Chat GPT to just write a book for me." And I'll be honest with you, I've seen the stuff that people are doing, and if they don't know how to write a book before they use it, it is not a book after they use it. It's
It is
just
a
not.
body of text. It's not a
Yeah,
book.
it's just text. It's kind of like the guy who says, "Hey, I have an idea, and I'll give you the idea, and you write it, and we'll both make money." I'm like, dude, that's not how it works. I throw out 1,000 ideas before breakfast every day. It's not lack of ideas; it's the time it takes to do it properly. But the other thing that I use AI voice for is through Descript, a company in Canada. I have a Mark Leslie Lefebvre Descript AI voice. And what I can do is in my podcast, if I'm doing the introduction and saying so and so lives 16 miles from whatever, and I was like, oh no, it's 16 kilometers. I should have said kilometers. I can go in and I can edit the text. It's connected with into script. I can change miles to kilometers, and my AI voice subs it in. which makes the production and the post editing that much easier. I don't have to go in and re-record myself, like the callbacks that the audio producers do. I don't have to do so imagine just the cost of callbacks on a book that's produced with a Samuel L. Jackson or some major star, and you've got to pay them thousands of dollars to get back into town, into the studio or whatever, and rent the studio space, where you're like, yeah, the callbacks took us an hour because we used an AI version just for those little things where they pronounce something wrong, right? So that's
corrections, basically.
Yeah, corrections. Yeah, they said something wrong or the enunciation wasn't proper. That's where you could potentially leverage that. It's kind of like when Photoshop has that cleanup feature on images. It's like the technology. If we can leverage the technology to our benefit as artists, we free up more time to do more of those things, which frees up time for consumers.
Beyond all these developments in AI, and the challenges in the book industry, you seem to have a pretty nuanced view of it all. How do you feel about the actual books that are coming out nowadays? Like beyond all the business and everything, how do you feel about the world of literature and how it's been affected by all these business changes?
What I love the best about it is there used to be a time where someone in New York or London used to say, no, we can't publish this book because we already did one like that.
Oh.
And they're guessing because they're selling the books to bookstores who have to sell them to readers. And in the new world of publishing, a writer can say, I don't care if vampires aren't in now. Vampires have always been in, but New York says they're in, they're out, they're in, they're out, they're in, they're out. They're always in. People always want to read vampire stories. If I want to write a vampire story, there are tens of millions of people who want to read vampire stories, no matter what New York says. And so what I love about this, and this is the same as for podcasts and for audiobooks and print books and ebooks, is that now there's an opportunity for no matter how niche the market is, there's probably going to be a reader out there who just wants another book like that. And there's enough readers out there that I think that's a great opportunity for writers. And so that's why I'm very optimistic about today's industry.
Because just with one search, you can find a book that's like extremely specific to what you're looking for. You can go on Perplexity or Google and go like, oh, I want a book about Harry magical car racing. I bet you can find like 20 books about it. That's very niche, but they exist.
They do. And isn't that great for readers?
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's awesome. There are fewer gatekeepers in that sense, where it used to be there would always be a publisher saying, no, we want this type of book, we want this type of book. And if it wasn't for those big publishers, your books just would not make it to bookstores. And it used to be the bookstores were the only place you can get books, but now the internet changed everything. Go figure.
100%.
Mark, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. I'd love to have you on again, eh?
I'd love to be back, eh?
Okay, I can't help myself. Have a good one. I'm feeling patriotic. It's election day in Canada right now.
It certainly is. Get out there and vote.
Of course. Have a good one, man. That was Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Mark is a writer, an editor, a professional speaker, and a self-proclaimed book nerd. We were talking about the publishing industry. That's all the time we have for today's edition of AMI Audiobook Review. AMI Audiobook Review airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and repeats every 6 hours. We're on all the big podcasting platforms, and that includes YouTube. You can email us your feedback at audiobookraview@ami.ca. That's audiobookraview@ami.ca. We love to hear from you. You can also follow us on Instagram at AMI Audiobook Review. That's at AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Have a good one.